My name is Katherine. I am a venture partner here at Archetype, early stage VC fund, focused on early stage crypto investments. I am also the COO of ENS Labs. And I'm going to turn over to my first panelist to introduce himself.
Hi, everybody. My name is Rodrigo Seira. I am special counsel at Cooley's new Miami office. My practice is working with crypto founders, startups, and investors, everything from forming your company, growing the team, financings, product advice, token launches. And yep, thank you for having us.
Hi everyone, I'm Vi Lee. I'm the GC of Anchorage Digital, which is home to the only federally chartered bank. We offer institutions custody, staking, settlement, on-chain governance, and other services.
Hey everybody, I'm Mike Katz. I'm a partner at Mannat. My practice is similar to Rodrigo's, but better. Also advise emerging companies, startups, founders, investors in the crypto AI space on everything from formation through exit, regulatory policy, everything you can imagine.
It's great to be here. My name is Ji Kim, President and Acting CEO of the Crypto Council for Innovation, CCI. We are a global industry association. We operate in US, federal and state, EU, UK, parts of Asia Pacific, and we represent exchanges, VC firms, stablecoin issuers, NFT platforms, and other companies in the space. And really our mission is to advocate for sensible regulation legislation across the world for our industry. It's great to be here again.
Yeah. So I've known every single one of you, I think, for a few cycles at this point. And I think sitting here today, this is a really, really interesting time to do a panel like this, because I feel like for as long as, at least like I've been in crypto, we've always been like, oh, where's regulation? We don't know how anybody stands on this. And I would say maybe even a year ago, like sentiment was really down so bad. And we're in the process of seeing right now today, I think, a unwinding of like the past couple of years. And there seems to be a lot of very bullish signals, right? White House summit, you have executive orders, changing of the guards at agencies. So it feels like things feel good. But maybe from your perspectives, I don't know if it's the same. So let me just start with, how are you feeling about crypto regulation today?
Are we going firing squad?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. Okay.
Firing squad. I wouldn't phrase it like that for sure.
So, I mean, I think it is a time to be very optimistic. I think we're still figuring out what it's exactly going to look like. But like you said, we are basically coming out from a period of 4 years under Gary Gensler that felt like, firebombing, where there was a intense focus on enforcement and a total breakdown of kind of communication and trust between the agency and the industry. And I think, especially speaking about the SEC, you have staff right now and Commissioner Peirce with their new crypto unit that is very focused on finding a solution, and the approach is totally different. It's like she feels personally responsible to try to help and empathetic. So things that have happened, they've withdrawn a bunch of the major cases that Gary Gensler has brought. Withdrawn things like SAB 121, which was an accounting rule that prevented banks from custodying crypto, is really starting to engage with the community to get folks' input about how they can do new rulemaking. I would expect that there's a bunch of no action relief coming down the pipe. So I think that's all shaping up to be really positive. If you zoom out a little bit, I think there's the potential that we get new legislature passed. I think probably the Trump meme coin didn't help things, and it's going to give the Democrats a bunch of ammunition and kind of a bad frame to look at crypto. But I'm hopeful that at least stable coins is something that people can get past. I don't think that it's all rosy though. The law hasn't really changed, and I think in this context, even though the risk that the SEC goes out and sues project is much lower now, outside of some crazy fraud situation, the private plaintiff law firms are still out there and have been iterating on like different like theories of liability that I expect they will keep bringing cases. So I think it's definitely like the most hopeful that it's been ever, but not clear exactly how it's going to shake out. And I think I'll end by saying like, as somebody that's been in crypto law and policy for a while, it's easy to be a critic and a cynic about the situation. Like I've done my fair amount of, Gary Gensler hate Twitter threads, and like I enjoy that as much as the next guy, but it's much harder to compromise and to like say what you're for than what you're like just, shit on the SEC. So that's going to be tough for an industry that is like super idealistic and, very passionate about regulation.
Yeah, so I'll just say, I know it might feel like a free-for-all right now, and I'm certainly, that's what I'm getting from people at my company, like, we can do whatever we want now, right? It's like, no, guys, actually you can't. AML is still a thing. Sanctions compliance is still required, things like that, right? So I do think the big difference, though, is that instead of the regulators telling us what they want us to do through suing us, we're actually going to get rulemaking and at some point legislation, right? Which is obviously a much better way to tell the market this is how we want you to behave. So I think that's the big sea change. Obviously, that is going to take time. It does seem like the SEC is trying to move pretty quickly, right? I think you're going to be at their first roundtable. What is it, later this month, right? So they really are. They're charging ahead. They're talking to industry. They've had a ton of meetings already, and I think they do want to put out guidance, rulemaking, probably no action letters. They've already put out guidance, right? They've told us they don't think meme coins are securities, right? So even though that's not an example of them saying this is how we're going to regulate X, telling the market what they don't consider securities also goes a long way towards providing regulatory clarity to market participants. So I think the SEC is moving in a really positive direction. The Senate stablecoin bill just got voted out of committee today with 5 Democrats that supported it. So they just need 2 more Democrats, which they'll certainly get, I think. And then that stablecoin bill is out of the Senate. The House version is very similar. So I think we're actually going to see a lot of movement, relatively quickly, even on the legislative front. So all of that is really positive because it doesn't mean that we can do whatever we want now, but we'll know what we can and can't do, right? And that's all we've been asking for years and years. Yeah, exactly. So we feel good about it.
Yeah, I think cautious optimism is the watchword, and we probably all feel the same way about that, because I think it is interesting. If you look at the last 4 years, the crypto regulatory environment was probably the biggest shit show of the Biden administration, although you could argue about that. And now, if you look at where we are, I'd say that the crypto regulatory environment is probably the most cohesive and coherent of the Trump administration. While he's flip-flopping on tariffs and 200% duties on French wine and Ukraine aid, yes and no, and firing and rehiring and firing again, bird flu researchers. There's a lot of stuff you could quibble with, but on the crypto front, the nominees for the various agencies are excellent. They're subject matter experts who have decades of experience. They have engaged with industry for many years. They're thoughtful people. They're high integrity people. And I think that offers a real opportunity for builders and investors in the space, and a real opportunity to do things the right way. And to what Rodrigo and Vi were saying, it's not a free-for-all. The securities laws remain on the books. They have not gone anywhere. Various consumer protection laws, various, marketing and advertising laws. These things all matter, and they should matter. And so I think that if companies are engaging in good faith and you take advantage of this improving political climate as well as the improving regulatory climate, and again, with regulators these are serious people who want to do the right thing and want to have this be a lasting regime that won't just flip back in 2 years or 4 years when the political winds shift. And so I think that there's a lot of room for optimism, but only if we sort of meet the moment.
I agree with everything my colleague said. It's very positive. I mean, we're coming off of 4 years, as Rodrigo mentioned, of immense regulation by enforcement, with a young or established company just not knowing how to operate here in the U.S. And now you have an administration and this president who are saying all the right things, right? They had a big summit. And if you take a step back, it's truly historic that the president of the United States is meeting with industry leaders to talk about how to build this innovation here in the U.S. We're seeing encouraging signs from the SEC, Commissioner Peirce, the task force, collaboration with the industry. But I agree with my panelists, which is we still need legislation which stands the test of time, that can overcome administration changes, agency changes, and that's the key question, right? How quickly can the U.S. move with stablecoin legislation, market structure legislation, and that's the next step. The president has said that he wants both pieces of bills to be on his desk before the August recess. It may be a little bit ambitious, but the fact that he's saying that is a positive sign. So we saw the stablecoin bill come out of the Senate today, vote out of the committee. That's extremely positive, as we mentioned. The House version is similar, and they're going to have a markup towards the end of the month. So we're seeing a lot of positive momentum. But to take a step back and look at the global picture, you're also seeing other jurisdictions watching very closely what the U.S. is doing. Like, it's great that the U.S. is moving fast for the first time in several years, but the UK, for example, they just recently announced that instead of taking a modular approach to crypto, they're doing an all-at-once approach, which is a big change for the UK. So now they want everything done by 2026. Here in the US, you have states which can move quicker. So California, Illinois, Florida, these are all states looking to establish their own version of the bit license, which exists here in New York too. So crypto is global, as we all know. So if you connect all of the dots here, you're seeing a lot of positive momentum across the world, and they're all watching the US because the US is leading, US is saying all the right things. But the question is, who's going to move the fastest for the race to the top is how I look at things.
I think that's like a really important point too. Like, whatever happens legislatively in the US is going to have a huge influence on what happens in the rest of the world, right? So like, a concrete example of that is, I forget if it's the Senate or the House version of the stablecoin bill, but one of them includes a reciprocity provision, which says that, okay, fine, you don't have to issue your stablecoin in the US, but if you want your stablecoin to trade on the secondary markets, like on exchanges in the US, it has to be issued in a jurisdiction that we're okay with, right? So that jurisdiction has to have a regime that largely complies with like all of the same requirements of our stablecoin law, right? And so like, if you're a stablecoin, it's hard to, I mean, if you're any sort of crypto company, it's really hard to ignore the US market. It's a huge market. It's a growing market. So you're going to want to be able to be here, right? Even if you're Tether, you're going to want to be able to be in the US market. And so whatever the US does, whatever Congress does, is really going to have an influence on laws around the world.
Yeah, and just to quickly build off of that, which is a good point as well, which is it's the Senate version, and why this is important is because it is a race to the top, because the Treasury Secretary is only going to acknowledge other jurisdictions, stablecoin regimes, if they meet the standards that the US has as well. So it's no longer like a low-touch stablecoin regime across the world, but all of these jurisdictions will want high standards, clear business conduct standards, reserve requirements, and that is only when you can be acknowledged here by the US and vice versa. So we're going to see jurisdictions working together collaboratively to build on a strong stablecoin foundation, which I think is really amazing and important for stablecoin innovators and consumers and investors as well.
Yeah. And just staying with you for a second, Ji. So now that we're squarely out of the regulation by enforcement era, we're seeing movements like probably fast. We're probably going to see faster movements on the legislative side, faster in the next 4 years than we have in the last 10. What are you optimistic about? What are you pessimistic about? So, for example, like stablecoin probably looking good, but what about market structure? What about, the DeFi Broker Act that I think just got repealed? Does that mean there's a space forward? Yeah, like walk us through that.
I'm naturally an optimistic person, so I'm pretty optimistic about all of these things.
Okay,
I won't dwell too much on stablecoins. We've discussed it. Market structure is the next big thing to move. That's going to be a lot more complicated for the reasons that I'm sure many of you know. What is a security versus a commodity? Who should have jurisdiction between the two agencies? Primary versus secondary transactions and so forth. But that is where the next attention will be. And again, I think the US will focus very much on coming up with that comprehensive framework as soon as possible. It'll be after stablecoins, but I think I'm optimistic that it can get done as early as this year. That may be too optimistic, but I do think it's going to be a big push to get it done ASAP. Is the point that I'm trying to make. December DeFi broker rule that you mentioned is huge. It passed the Senate, the repeal of it, passed the Senate, passed the House. To technicality, it has to go back to the Senate, but that will be the first crypto legislation that the president will sign. It's a matter of when, not if. So that's going to already happen. So that's an extremely low-hanging fruit, something that's already happened, basically. And then there are going to be more tailored bills in the U.S. That could be potentially be wrapped up in a market structure bill. But what is the treatment of NFTs, for example? Should it implicate securities laws or not? There's been bills publicly noticed already on this topic, but it'll probably be mentioned in the broader market structure bill potentially. Cross-collaboration between the two agencies, CFTC and SEC. The president's CEO explicitly said he wants more of that, but there have been bills introduced that talk about the need for these two agencies to collaborate together and to actually put it in bills. So these are more tailored bills, but they should be wrapped up in other bills, including market structure. But the timing, I've learned not to predict the timing of these things. I would say stablecoins first before market structure, but I do think the industry and Congress will work very aggressively to get the president a market structure bill as soon as possible.
I do think it's also worth noting, you mentioned that the DeFi broker rule was repealed in both the House and the Senate. 75 Democrats in the House, 17 Democrats in the Senate. Those numbers keep going up from the bills that were passed in the prior administration or not passed. And I think it really is important for this industry to be bipartisan or nonpartisan. And, power goes back and forth, both at the federal level and at the states. And I think to fully, Trumpify or magify crypto would be a short-term win and a long-term loss. And if we want to keep boosting those bipartisan numbers, I think it's important to keep that in mind.
I think that the repeal of the IRS DeFi broker rule is like such a good example of what you were alluding to earlier, which is like it's really easy to say what you hate and what's bad because like everyone agrees that rule was totally overreaching, completely unworkable, blah blah blah. But it's like, what is a workable alternative, right? Like that is the much harder part, and that's what we have to do now.
Yeah. Now, a lot of people here, actually, how many of you here are US-based founders in crypto? So I think maybe I can ask this on behalf of the founders, because I think the last few years, big question, probably a question that's crossed every founder's mind, do I need to move out the US? And right now, we're all cautiously optimistic. And Rodrigo, specifically you and Mike, you guys advise a lot of US founders, presumably even as they're thinking about setting up their entities, they're probably going to you, hey, am I good to stay here now? So from your perspective, is the US open for business?
I think the short answer, yes, more than ever. There's still some ambiguity around it, right? The last cycle, I think a lot of founders maybe understandably reacting to the enforcement environment in the US had sort of like a knee-jerk reaction of like, I need to like get outside of the US's jurisdiction. In my view, a lot of those attempts were kind of like half measures that wouldn't really help if it came down to like a lawsuit and ended up making projects just unwieldy and like inefficient to operate. From a kind of legal perspective, I think it's important to distinguish kind of like the sort of activity that leads to like a violation of the law that can get you in trouble versus the sort of activity that can lead to a court in a specific place having jurisdiction over you. So, I mean, to like start with the real rub in whether you're potentially liable for like a violation of a U.S. law is not so much like whether you're sitting in the Brooklyn or in like some other place. It's like whether you're serving U.S. users, right? So a lot of people would just try to have offshore structures but still be serving U.S. users and to not much effect, right? We also saw the last cycle basically coalesce around the structure that would use a Cayman foundation structure and a BVI sub to issue the token and kind of like manage the foundation. I think that today is probably still the dominant structure that most projects use, but I think that we're in the beginning of the phase where at least like the design space has been blown open, and if you want to maybe try to predict a little bit, I think there's going to be more of a trend to companies starting to just launch tokens out of the US. The main issues to solve around that are really tax-driven issues, and it's more specifically, if you're doing an airdrop or like the wide token distribution, like what sort of tax withholding and tax reporting obligations are you going to have? But there are some projects that have, working on some creative solutions with top-tier advisors, talking like people like Deloitte that are getting behind these things. So I think we'll see the first few of these like in the next couple quarters, and then hopefully that starts to open up the door to more founders doing it. I guess like on the flip side of that, and then I'll kick it to Mike so that he can butcher the point, is the existing Cayman structure has some like real downsides, right? Like a lot of the projects that were using that, you basically have to pretend like you're two companies, and it's hard, right? And it makes it really inefficient. And it doesn't really protect you from liability for a lot of these lawsuits that I mentioned earlier, which are being brought by private plaintiffs that basically allege that like token holders are part of a general partnership. So I think people are both like wanting to figure out ways to do it in the US and also realizing that there's some real downsides to like the existing structure.
Yeah, I largely agree with Rodrigo's pretty long-winded answer. I think that...
Be civil, okay?
Yeah. I think that it has always been absurd that U.S. companies could not serve U.S. users. And that was pretty much the case for a variety of crypto companies for the last 4 years. I think the U.S. is open for business, and I think we're both working with clients who are looking at creative solutions, U.S. foundations, the Wyoming DUNA structure, other types of structures that will work hand in glove with potentially, offshore vehicles as well. And I think that what you want, though, is to see where the rules are going. So I think that, as we talked about in sort of the first discussion, none of the rules have changed yet. We don't have new legislation. Yes, we got guidance on meme coins, and I expect we'll get more no action letters and more guidance on airdrops and other things. But I think in order to really understand like what structure in the US can work and how it can work from a regulatory standpoint and how it can work from a tax standpoint and how it can work from like a practical business standpoint, because I do agree with Rodrigo. Like I think the two companies, but not really, we're one, but no, we're not, it has been very stressful and difficult, and the lines keep changing. And so I think you want whatever the new iteration is for this way forward to be something that works on all of those fronts. And I don't think we have enough information yet to be able to do that.
The SEC dismissing or like withdrawing cases or investigations, that's not legal precedent, right?
Right. Exactly. And like you're still seeing, even under this administration, there was a settlement in the OKX exchange case. OKX money transmission, money services business violations. This happened under the Trump Justice Department. So, the regulators are still going to come after companies for violating U.S. law. And if you're not following those laws, and there's a variety of rules, regulations, and laws that you need to comply with. And so like in the OKX example, like they said they were offshore. And so they were outside the ambit of U.S. law. They were the judge and the lawyers and said, no, you aren't. And you serve U.S. customers, and you also market to U.S. customers. And by the way, you help U.S. customers set up VPNs to get around our geo-blocking. And so these things really matter, and the regulators still care. Like this is a case that was just settled a couple weeks ago. And so I think the U.S. is definitely open for business, but we need to be smart about this, and we need to see where the rules are going so that we can actually devise structures and company policies, procedures, et cetera, that work.
I think it's also important to note that the DOJ has not started unwinding anything, right? Like the SEC has gotten rid of all of these cases, but like Tornado Cash and like all of these like illicit finance related, money laundering related cases are still live, and I haven't heard anything about them going away, so.
Right, and like Republican administrations have historically been much more stringent about like national security and sanctions violations and stuff like that they are about market regulation, right? So I think particularly important for anybody like building any sort of like privacy protocol, like that I think is still relatively high risk and not likely to get like a free pass under Trump.
And I swear Rodrigo did not put me up to this, but he had a good article a couple months ago focused on state AG enforcement actions as well. So obviously a lot of focus on federalized. There should be, and I agree with everything that was said, but the state attorney generals are also going to potentially ramp up or focus on this industry even more. Again, not the people in this room, of course, but just generally speaking. So it's important to keep in mind what the states are up to, what the AGs are up to, and just to consider those state laws as well for you all.
I think especially for the states that, I mean, I'm just going to come out and say it, like blue states that feel like the Trump administration and a Republican-controlled Congress is being way too lax on all of this stuff. I think you're going to see them really step up and try to fill that.
And they did that in Trump 1. Like the New York Attorney General's office has broad powers under New York security laws. New York has an act called the Martin Act. It's like a bazooka, and then it gives the New York Attorney General like immense authority to bring claims.
You have firsthand experience with it.
Firsthand experience the last time V and I were on a panel together. And I can tell you that office and these state AG's offices, they see political incentives. They are elected officials. And Tish James in New York believes that she's the crypto sheriff of Wall Street. And she wants to maybe run for governor one day. And that is the...
Same with DFS.
Right. And these agencies do operate with politics in mind, and these organizations. And I think it is important, like if the Trump meme coin stuff and some of the other more, like if the Trump family takes a stake in Binance, like these kinds of things will provide grist to the blue state AGs and financial regulators as they want to bring politically popular to their constituency lawsuits.
And just to add to what Mike just said, this is an actual reality. I think it was maybe 2 years ago, the New York AG was advocating or introducing a bill in New York, which would have given the New York AG's office expansive authority and power beyond what they currently have.
Which is already expansive.
Right. They would have uprooted the business models of entities who are already licensed by the DFS with a BitLicense Trust Charter license. So you could not be a custodian and exchange all under one entity. So if this happened, this would have meant that New York regulated companies would have to leave New York because you just can't operate in New York that way, right? So we saw that 2 years ago, and hopefully not, but it's quite possible that it happens.
Yeah, it's funny if you look at I forget which platforms it is, but there are a lot of like crypto platforms where it'll say like this service is not available to the users of like North Korea and Iran and like New York State. Like they are like DFS and like the New York regulators really are very strict. So just something to keep in mind.
So TLDR, contrary to the meme, it is in fact not crime season.
Yes.
Crime is not legal. Crime is not legal.
Let's put a stop to the narrative. So I guess with all of that in mind, how should founders think about decision making in the next 4 years, right? So could there be fears that I do something now and then it gets repealed, when the next administration comes, or even in, the serving the US thing, right? So maybe in the next 4 years at some point, things get, good enough or defined enough where I can serve US users, but then in 4 years I can't. So how should founders think about making decisions in the next 4 years and then beyond that? And we can start, let's start with you, Mike, and then.
Yeah, I think that you need to take both a short-term and a long-term view. And the way I sort of think about it and the way I counsel my clients is you should have core flexibility. Like you should be doing certain core things to make sure you're on the right side of the securities laws, of regulations, of the states, of private plaintiff actions, because those things are all real, they exist, they're happening. But you also want to position yourself flexibly to take advantage of the fact that we're in a rapidly shifting regulatory environment, often for the better. And so you want to be able to be positioned to skate to where the puck is going. And I don't think that there's a tension there. I think you can do both of those things. And I think it is important, again, like I said this before, politically, the goal should be to be successful whether a Democrat is president or a Republican is president, whether it's a Republican Congress or a Democratic Congress. And so supporting policies and politicians on both sides who support innovative or pro-innovation, pro-crypto legislation and ideas, even if they're not 100% on your side. Like the self-defeating purity tests will be value destructive for the industry and for founders. And so I think making decisions that take into account the long term while also being like able to be flexible and adaptive in the short term is the key.
I think it comes down to taking a nuanced view about what the different regimes that apply are. and then making a risk-adjusted decision about how fast you want to scale in an environment that is being liberalized versus how conservative you want to be in like a downside protection, right? So for things like sanctions, like we said, like I wouldn't roll the dice on that. For like securities regulation, I think there's some downside risks and potential like private lawsuits, but I think the chances of the SEC suing you for like anything other than like fraud are very low. So I see people going like way far up the risk curve. So I think it's, I don't know, like I see my role as not being in the risk avoidance business. I'm more in like the explaining risks to people and allowing them to be able to make their own business decisions about what they want to do. I do think part of what Mike said, like, is important to highlight. Like, you have to have some sort of foresight and think about how things are going to move. So it's important to like keep your ear to the ground, see kind of what the discourse is at the agency level, and then on some level just do like common sense things that you know are like the right way to do business, right? Like don't take, like I think it's okay to like take on more risk, but I don't know, you like I think on some level like we all know when things are over the line and like you're taking advantage of people and like you shouldn't just deal like that, right? So yeah, it's an interesting time to be a crypto founder.
I do think also, just to add on to that, like I think founders should pay attention to like the things that they are publicly saying and doing more than they typically do. And that's not to say don't say anything, don't talk. I agree with Rodrigo. It's like you should understand the risks and make the right business decision. But I can tell you that when there are lawsuits and investigations, often the first thing that the investigators or the plaintiffs point to are your tweets. It's page one. And so those tweets are public and they are saved. And I know that regulators look at crypto Twitter. I have a law school friend who is unfortunately a private plaintiff's attorney. And he told me that he goes on crypto Twitter and like reads stuff to try to find case ideas. And yeah, so like the sharks are lurking. And so I think it's genuinely important to like be thoughtful about what you say and how you say it, because a lot of the trouble that people got in the last cycle was how they were describing yield products and how they were describing things being safe and secure or not, or investment products or not, or certain consumer protection violations or not. And so that's one area that's actually like, it's easier to do than you might think. You should work with your advisors to do it, but be thoughtful about what you put out there.
No rocket ship emojis.
I think those are okay now, actually.
I also think there's a really exciting opportunity for founders to meet with regulators, and others may think I'm crazy, but you have this like sea change, to use V's word, and you're going to have the SEC with FinHub being more empowered, CFTC with Lab CFTC, even at the state levels. Like, meet with them, like tell them your ideas, tell them about your passions, conviction, and your origin stories, and go with good advisors and counsels like these people up here on the panel too, but like go talk to them and see how they react to what you're saying. I think that's what's going to change hopefully in the next 4 years and the years to come, which is a real opportunity to work with regulators to explain the use case, what you're experimenting with, and you could use that and come back internally to your respective companies to just talk about like what we should do next and factoring in everything that was said so far.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
You can't regulate what you don't understand.
Yeah.
Right? Which is why like the last 4 years was so just kind of disappointing and frustrating, is that like anytime you have a new and emerging technology, the people who are going to understand it the best are those that are actually building with it like on the ground. It's not going to be the regulators like ever. And so just the lack of dialogue and engagement, I think, was just a real missed opportunity and just a lot of wasted time. But things are changing for the better.
Yeah, that actually segues perfectly to my next question. And we talked about it a little bit already today, but I think, Rodrigo, you said that earlier. This is an industry where it's easy to be reactive and critical, right? Someone draft bill, oh, I hate this is stupid. How can any of you guys write this? But then when you're asked, so how should we write it? Crickets. And then Ji, to your point, like, okay, so now that the door feels open, like concretely for a crypto founder based in the US, in New York, what are actually constructive ways to give constructive feedback or even suggestions on how something should be? Is it writing it in the public somewhere? Is it contact? Like what does that even look like?
Yeah, I think I'm happy to start. I think a lot of it's like meeting with policymakers. So to use your example in New York, it's executive chamber of the governor's office. It could be with the New York DFS. It could be with the legislator. But schedule time to talk about your business. And really, I meet with a lot of policymakers in my line of work, and they get bored by me. I'm a boring attorney, right? But where they get the most excited about is to hear like founders and builders and entrepreneurs about why this matters, why it matters to the local economy, to the national economy, to the constituents, and telling that story. And that makes the biggest difference. When I talk about stablecoins, they don't want to hear from me about what the business conduct standard should be. They want to hear about what does it mean for remittances, for people in New York, how do they use it? So do that. And it's a shameless plug, but you all are busy. Like a good trade association goes a long way. They'll keep track of developments, tell you what's going on at federal, state, global levels, and you can figure out how to react to. Should I do a comment letter? Should I meet with them? But you never want the first time that you meet a regulator to be when you want something. So meet with them early and often. Schedule meetings. And I know there's Founders Days in DC, led by different organizations, including ours. I know Kat helped us with a CCI day where she explained how self-hosted wallets work. So there are a lot of opportunities out there. And really, it's about just showcasing what you all are up to and why it's important for the U.S. and other jurisdictions.
So I'll try to make this a little spicy. I think the overall premise of like we should engage is true. I think it's also true that the environment has changed dramatically in the sense that like under the last admin, like no sophisticated lawyer would ever tell you to go meet with the SEC because they would just like nod their head and write down some notes and then pass them over to enforcement. I think that dynamic is different, but I also would caution people about like their expectations about going to meet with regulators, right? Like it's not like a thing where you're gonna have immediate ROI. And I also feel like a lot of people like to go to those things because it makes them feel important, and you get like a photo op in Capitol Hill, and like it's not.
That's why you're doing the roundtable, right?
It's not much. Well, that's different, I think, but it's I think you need to go basically with like a long-term view, and don't expect that you're gonna get any definitive answers right away, right? Like the two of the concrete steps that you can take are Commissioner Hester Peirce put out a RFI that has like 50 questions that you can write in answers to, right? I think that's probably like a relatively low bar to engage with, and then you can she'll consider them thoughtfully. The other path that some other industry players are taking, which is like a lot more burdensome, is to try to get like what's called no action relief, which is basically you go into the SEC and you tell them, hey, I'm like trying to do this thing and I don't really know like how it fits. I think I shouldn't be regulated this way. And then ideally, if it all works out, you get a letter from enforcement that says like, we're not going to recommend enforcement based on this, right? So I worked on the first one of those for an ERC20 token. It took like a year of meetings back and forth through the SEC. And then at the end of the day, it's like a public good, right? Because anybody else can rely on it. So from like an individual business decision perspective, it's kind of tough to say, I'm gonna go meet with these people for like a year, like give them all this information, pay a bunch of expensive lawyers to go down there. And then like, if I win, everybody else gets to like piggyback on this too. So it's tough, right? So I think, yes, definitely you should engage. The environment is different, but like, don't think that like, you're gonna get, it's not like a thing that you like get something out right away, right? It's like a long-term play.
Yeah, it's like, at this point, I think a lot of it is just about educating them.
And remember that if you do submit stuff for the RFI and otherwise with government agencies, that expect that it will be public. Yeah.
What is, well, I have two questions, but you could choose to answer either one. You can either tell me your hottest take on crypto policy, or you can just give me a prediction about something in the crypto policy space in the next year. I'll start with Mike. I'll start with you.
Spicy. I think that this is like I think sort of crypto policy adjacent, but I think there should and will be consequences for regulatory abuse in the Biden administration. I think it would be wrong if people like Gary Gensler just get off scot-free, actually. I think they weaponized subpoenas, document requests, certainly lawsuits, obviously, but there was like a real cost to that. Businesses were destroyed. Certain people's lives were maybe not destroyed, but severely disrupted. And the idea that that should just be, all right, like now move on, go to a new law firm, go teach at MIT, go do your thing. I feel like there should and will be some consequences there. Spicy enough?
Yeah.
Was it spicy or hot take, or was it?
Spicy and hot take are the same thing, but you could also give a prediction if you don't really want to go there.
Well, I said I'm an optimist. I'm going to stick with what I said earlier, which is stablecoins and market structure legislation done this year in the U.S. And I think it's very ambitious, but I also think, as we've talked about throughout this panel, there's a real bipartisan focus on digital assets. And I think, that's important to keep in mind. And I think today's stablecoin bill passing out of committee was an example of that. I think we'll see more of that on the House side as well. And I think, as we talked about, the previous administration has not been good for our industry. And I think Democrats, generally speaking, are realizing that this is not meant to be a Republican versus D issue. It should be, for both parties. And I think going back to my earlier points about the need to educate, meet with policymakers and regulators, like the more they understand all of this, the more they understand it. They get it. They understand why it's important to U.S. innovation, leadership, and growth. So I think when you combine the bipartisan approach, this administration wanting to make quick movement to pro-crypto Congress than ever before, I'm going to stick with my hot take being we get both pieces of legislation done this year.
It's very optimistic.
Do you think that, I'm curious if you agree with this. It seems like, especially on the bipartisan front, like the younger, newer Dem members, like Also Brooks and Gallego and Andy Kim in New Jersey, like all these guys they're pro-crypto. And maybe the problem wasn't so much a like Democrat-Republican issue, but it was like that various Democratic senators were octogenarians and now they're gone.
Yeah, I also think it's like a new member of Congress being more open-minded versus someone who has been listening to Elizabeth Warren for like the last 4 years.
Yeah,
it's been great to see the freshman members of Congress. Like we met with a lot of them, and they're very curious. Not all of them come with like a well-informed understanding of digital assets or crypto, but they want to meet and learn and understand, and they don't come in with like a biased view against crypto, right? So I think that's been encouraging. And you also have folks like Richie Torres from New York. He's long led when it comes to this space and really understanding not just that we need a framework in the U.S., but like really the nuances and the inherent attributes of crypto, which has been really encouraging to see.
Yeah.
So my prediction is that stablecoin legislation will happen by August, as Trump wished for. I do think that will happen. And then my hot take, sorry, Rodrigo, he's heard this rant many times before.
I don't know what's coming.
My hot take is that almost no tokens out there are securities. I think securities or security investment contract securities, so under Howey, are only things that give you an actual share of profits. Literally, they will distribute a share of profits to you or some share of ownership, and that's almost no tokens out there.
Supreme
That's
Court
my
disagrees.
hot take.
But
So the Supreme Court was wrong. Yeah.
My hot take / prediction is by the middle of the Trump admin, the dominant token launch structure will be Americoins. We're getting rid of our Kim friends. That's it.
Okay.
It's probably true.
Well, that is a good note to end on. We'll move into Q&A, but round of applause first for our panelists.